Ambassador Li Wu sat in the Great Hall of Nexus Prime and watched the alien delegates argue about mining rights in the Outer Rim. The massive space station floated at the center of the galaxy where 50 different species came to make decisions that affected billions of lives. Li Wu had been Earth's representative for 3 years now, and he still felt like the new kid in a classroom full of ancient teachers. The Kelvin delegate was speaking through its translation device about copper extraction rates when the emergency alarm began to sound. Red lights flashed across the curved walls, and every conversation stopped. Li Wu had never heard this alarm before, but he knew it meant serious trouble. High Counselor Vexitar stepped to the central platform. The tall blue being had been leading council sessions for over 200 years, and Li Wu had never seen him look worried before. Today was different. Vexitar's usually calm voice carried a tremor as he spoke. Members of the council, we have received an urgent transmission from the hegemony of Vorth. They demand immediate audience. Li Wu felt his stomach drop. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Vorth. 4 ancient species that had joined together thousands of years ago to become the most powerful military force in known space. They rarely spoke to the council, and when they did, it was usually to deliver ultimatums. The main viewing screen descended from the ceiling and filled with the image of a Vorth command ship. The vessel was larger than most space stations and bristled with weapons that could destroy planets. Standing on its bridge was High Commander Zalthek, a creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and a machine. His red eyes glowed as he began to speak. Galactic Council, we come with a demand that cannot be ignored. The species known as humans must be removed from this body immediately. They are too young, too dangerous, and too unpredictable to hold membership among civilized peoples. Li Wu stood up from his seat, but Vexitar gestured for him to remain silent. The High Counselor knew that interrupting a Vorth transmission was a bad idea. Zalthek continued without pause. In the 50 years since humans joined this council, they have expanded faster than any species in galactic history. They have built warships and colonies at an alarming rate. Most concerning is their tendency to form emotional attachments with other species. This behavior threatens the natural order that has kept the galaxy stable for millennia. The human ambassador looked around the hall and saw mixed reactions on alien faces. Some delegates nodded in agreement while others looked uncomfortable. A few species that had worked closely with humans appeared genuinely upset. We give this council 72 standard hours to expel humanity from membership and order all human colonies beyond their home system to be abandoned. If this demand is not met, we will solve the human problem ourselves. Our fleet is already moving toward human space. The transmission ended, and the hall erupted in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species began talking at once in languages that the translation system struggled to keep up with. Li Wu remained standing and waited for the noise to die down before he spoke. High Counselor, I request permission to address the assembly. Vexitar nodded, and the hall gradually became quiet. Li Wu had given many speeches in this chamber, but never one that might determine the fate of his entire species. Fellow delegates, the accusations made by High Commander Zalthek are based on fear, not facts. Yes, humanity has expanded quickly, but we have done so peacefully and with respect for existing territorial claims. Yes, we build ships, but only to defend our people and help our allies. As for forming emotional bonds with other species, we consider this our greatest strength, not a weakness. Several delegates murmured approval, but Li Wu could see that others remained unmoved. The Althari representative stood and spoke in her musical voice. Ambassador Li Wu speaks truth. Humans have been valuable partners in trade and exploration. They helped my people evacuate 3 colonies when the Helix Nebula became unstable. We found their emotional response genuine and their assistance invaluable. The crystalline Zephyr delegate added their support with harmonic tones that the translator rendered as words. Human engineers solve problems we thought impossible. Their creative thinking comes from their emotional nature, not despite it, but the Morgani representative disagreed. The Vorth raise valid concerns. Humans do expand rapidly and their military grows stronger each year. Perhaps it would be wise to consider their proposal. Li Wu felt the debate slipping away from him. Too many species were afraid of the Vorth to risk opposing them openly. He needed to buy time for diplomacy to work. I propose a formal investigation into these charges. Give us time to present evidence of humanity's peaceful intentions. Surely, 72 hours is not enough time to make such a momentous decision. High. Councillor Vextar considered this request. The proposal has merit, but we cannot delay if the Vorth fleet is truly moving. I will contact High Commander Zalthek and request an extension. The session was suspended, and delegates began forming small groups to discuss the crisis privately. Li Wu found himself surrounded by representatives from species that had worked with humans. They offered support, but most admitted they feared Vorth retaliation if they opposed the ultimatum too strongly. The ambassador made his way back to the human embassy section of Nexus Prime. His secure communicator buzzed with an urgent message. It was from Admiral Han Ri back on Earth. Li, the Vorth fleet is real and it's huge. Our long-range sensors count. Over 3,000 ships heading for the Outer Rim colonies. Captain Park Bo is moving our fleet to intercept, but we're badly outnumbered. How much time can you buy us? Li Wu typed back quickly. Working on it, but the Council is scared. Many species want to avoid conflict with the Vorth. Need something to change the narrative. In his private office, Li Wu called an emergency meeting with his staff, Dr. Kim. So his chief cultural advisor had been studying Vorth history and behavior since the crisis began. Engineer Yunda had arrived from Earth just 2 days earlier, with classified reports on humanity's military capabilities. The situation is worse than we thought, Dr. Kim so began. I've been researching Council archives and found references to 3 other species that were expelled by Vorth ultimatums. All 3 were completely destroyed within a year of their expulsion. Li Wu felt cold despite the station's warmth. Why were they really targeted? That's the interesting part. None of them were particularly aggressive or expansionist. But all 3 had one thing in common. They were natural diplomats who formed alliances easily across species lines. The Vorth seemed to view this as a threat to galactic stability. Engineer Yunda looked up from her tablet. Admiral Han Ri wants you to know that our ships are equipped with new quantum shield technology. We've been testing it in secret for 2 years. It might give us an edge in battle, but we still can't match their numbers. The ambassador walked to his window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a massive fleet was approaching human space with the intention of wiping out his species. Here in the council chambers, most delegates were too afraid to stand up for what was right. His communicator buzzed again. This time, the message was from Captain Park Bo aboard the flagship Indomitable. Evacuation of civilian populations has begun on all frontier worlds. Military families are being relocated to secure facilities. We estimate 48 hours before the Vorth reach New Busan. That's our farthest colony and probably their first target. Li Wu closed his eyes and tried to think. Diplomacy was his weapon, but it only worked when people were willing to listen. The Vorth had already made their decision, and too many council species were paralyzed by fear. Dr. Kim so interrupted his thoughts. There might be another option. I found someone who can help us access restricted council records. Counselor Tak Yu works in the archives, and she's been asking questions about the Vorth expulsions, too. Set up a meeting, Li Wu decided. If we're going to fight this, we need to understand what we're really up against. As night cycle began on Nexus Prime, Li Wu received word that High Counselor Vexitar had been unable to reach the Vorth fleet. The 72-hour deadline would stand. In less than 3 days, the Council would vote on whether to abandon humanity to their fate. The ambassador looked at his reflection in the darkened window and wondered if he was about to become the man who watched his species die. Outside, the stars continued to shine as they had for billions of years. Soon, some of those stars would light the fires of war. Counselor Tak Yu met Li Wu in the deep archives of Nexus Prime, where few beings ever ventured. The small, gray-skinned woman had worked in these data vaults for 30 years and knew where every secret was buried. Her large yellow eyes reflected the glow of ancient holographic displays as she led the human ambassador through narrow corridors lined with information crystals. What I am about to show you could cost me my position, she whispered as they walked. But after studying the Vorth patterns for months, I believe the galaxy deserves to know the truth. They stopped at a secured terminal that required Tak Yu's biometric signature to access. The screen filled with records dating back 3,000 years. Li Wu watched as she pulled up files about the Kethmar, the first species expelled by Vorth Ultimatum. The official records say the Kethmar were destroyed by internal conflicts. After leaving the council, Tak Yu explained. But look at this classified military report filed by a Vorth patrol ship 6 months later. The document showed coordinates of a dead star system where the Kethmar homeworld had been. The patrol report was brief but clear. Complete orbital bombardment, no survivors detected, all infrastructure destroyed, Dr. Kim. So leaned closer to read the details. They didn't destroy themselves. The Vorth hunted them down and wiped them out. Tak Yu nodded grimly. The same pattern appears for the other two species. The Melody who were expelled 800 years ago, and the unified clans who lost council membership just 2 centuries past. All were officially destroyed by internal problems. All were actually eliminated by Vorth fleets. Li Wu felt his hands shake as he absorbed this information. Why hasn't anyone exposed this before? Because the survivors were scattered and afraid. The few witnesses were either Vorth allies or species too weak to challenge the official story. But I found something else that explains the real pattern. The counselor brought up personality profiles and diplomatic records for all 3 extinct species. Despite their different biologies and cultures, they shared remarkable similarities. All were naturally empathetic. All formed strong bonds across species lines. All were skilled at bringing together diverse groups for common purposes. The Vorth don't fear human military expansion, Dr. Kim so realized. They fear human diplomatic expansion. They're afraid we'll unite the galaxy against them. Tak Yu closed the files and turned to face them directly. There's more. I've been monitoring Vorth communications through my archive access codes. They're not just planning to destroy human colonies. They intend to make examples of any species that supports humanity. The message will be clear. Oppose the Vorth and share humanity's fate. Li Wu thanked the brave counselor and returned to his office with a heavy heart. The evidence was clear, but it was also useless. Even if he could prove Vorth guilt to the council, most delegates would be too terrified to act on it. Fear was the Vorth's greatest weapon, and they had been wielding it for millennia. His secure communicator showed 17 missed messages from Earth. Admiral Han Ri was coordinating the largest military mobilization in human history, but the numbers were still hopeless. Captain Park Bo reported that the human fleet could muster 200 ships at best. Long-range sensors showed the Vorth bringing over 3,000 vessels. Engineer Yun Da had been working around the clock to prepare humanity's secret advantages for combat. The quantum shield technology was promising but untested in real battle. More importantly, she had been overseeing the installation of advanced communication arrays on every human ship and base. The quantum networks will give us coordination advantages. The Vorth have never seen, she explained to Li Wu during their emergency briefing. Their fleets use traditional command structures that rely on hierarchy and rigid formations. Our ships can share information and adapt tactics in real time. But tactical advantages meant little against such overwhelming numbers. Li Wu knew that humanity's only hope lay in building a coalition strong enough to make the Vorth think twice about their ultimatum. He spent the next day meeting privately with every friendly delegate he could reach. The Althari promised to consider supporting humanity, but needed time to consult their home government. The Zephyr offered to share their energy weapon technology, but could not commit ships to a military conflict. Even species that genuinely liked humans were reluctant to risk Vorth anger. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Representative Malsek of the Draknor Confederacy approached Li Wu during a council break. The lizard-like being was known for his aggressive negotiating style and had never shown particular fondness for humans. Ambassador, your species has caused me considerable trouble over the years. Malsek began with what might have been a smile. Your emotional diplomacy disrupts traditional power structures and makes deals harder to enforce. Li Wu waited for the inevitable rejection of support. However, the Draknor continued. I have watched the Vorth dominate galactic politics for centuries, through fear and intimidation. If they succeed in destroying humanity today, they will feel free to target anyone who inconveniences them tomorrow. The Draknor Confederacy will not vote to expel your species. This was the first solid commitment Li Wu had received. One by one, other species began to follow the Draknor lead. The Hive Collective announced they would abstain rather than support expulsion. 3 smaller species pledged to vote against the Vorth ultimatum, but it was not enough. The mathematics of council voting required a 2/3 majority to expel a member species. The Vorth had been building their coalition for weeks before delivering their ultimatum. Too many delegates feared the consequences of defiance. With 18 hours remaining before the vote, Li Wu received devastating news from Captain Park Bo. The Vorth fleet had reached the edge of human space and was demanding the immediate surrender of New Busan Colony. General Choi Jun has 40,000 troops on the planet, along with civilian population of 2 million, the captain reported. The Vorth are offering to spare civilian lives if our military forces surrender without resistance. Li Wu closed his eyes and tried to think clearly. If New Busan surrendered, it might save lives in the short term, but it would also demonstrate human weakness to the galaxy. If they fought and lost, it would achieve the same result with much higher casualties. What does General Choi recommend? He asked. He wants to fight. Says his people didn't sign up to hand over human worlds to alien bullies. But the decision has to come from civilian leadership. The ambassador looked at Dr. Kim, who had been listening to the conversation. Her expression was grim but determined. If we surrender now, the Vorth win without firing a shot, she said quietly. Every species watching will see that humans can be intimidated just like everyone else. Our diplomatic position becomes worthless. Li Wu made the hardest decision of his life. Tell General Choi to prepare his defenses. New Busan will not surrender. The final council session began with High Counselor Vextar calling for formal statements from each member species. One by one, the delegates announced their positions. Some spoke of friendship with humanity, but voted for expulsion anyway. Others remained neutral out of fear. When the Vorth coalition had enough votes to guarantee victory, High Commander Zalthek appeared on the viewing screen again. His red eyes seemed to glow brighter as he spoke. The Council has made a wise decision. Human expansion ends today. Any species that interferes with Vorth enforcement actions will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Li Wu stood for his final address to the assembly. He looked around the great hall at faces that represented thousands of different worlds and billions of different lives. Some looked ashamed. Others seemed relieved that the crisis was over. A few appeared genuinely sad. Fellow delegates, the vote is complete, and humanity accepts the will of this body. But I want you to remember this day when the Vorth come for you next, because they will come. Fear is a tool that grows stronger with each use. Today you have taught them that it works. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Li Wu received a priority message from the military communications network. The battle for New Busan had begun. Captain Park Bo's voice was tense but controlled as he delivered his report. Vorth ships are entering the system in formation. General Choi's ground defenses are active. We're about to find out if humanity's courage is stronger than Vorth firepower. Li Wu left the council chambers and walked toward the human embassy section. He passed groups of alien delegates who avoided eye contact or offered meaningless condolences. Behind him, the great hall fell silent as representatives returned to their normal business of trade disputes and territorial negotiations. In his private office, the ambassador activated the secure communication link that would keep him connected to humanity's final battle. On his desk lay the formal expulsion order that would go into effect at midnight station time. By tomorrow morning, the human embassy would be closed, and he would be on a transport back to Earth if Earth still existed. General Choi Jun watched the Vorth fleet enter the New Busan system through the tactical display in his command bunker. 300 massive ships moved in perfect formation toward the blue-green world that 2 million humans called home. Against them, he had 40,000 soldiers and defensive systems that had never been tested in real combat. Estimated time to orbital bombardment range. He asked his operations officer. Major Shin Hai checked her instruments carefully. 6 hours at current speed. Their formation suggests they plan to demand surrender before opening fire. The general nodded and activated the planetary communication system. Every screen and speaker on New Busan carried his voice as he addressed the population. Citizens of New Busan, we face an enemy that wants to drive humanity from the stars. They offer us a choice between surrender and destruction. But there is a third option. We can show them that humans do not break easily. Across the planet, families gathered around communication devices to hear their military commander speak. In The capital city of New Seoul crowds filled the streets despite the danger from above. I will not lie to you. The enemy fleet is larger than anything we have ever faced. But we are not alone. Our fleet stands ready to defend this world, and signals are coming from across the galaxy. Other species are watching to see what humans are made of. This was true, though General Choi did not mention how few species had actually committed to help. The evacuation ships that should have been carrying civilians to safety were instead positioning themselves in defensive formations around the planet. Aboard those vessels were not just humans, but refugees from a dozen different species. Captain Park Bo led the human fleet from the bridge of the Indomitable as they prepared for battle against impossible odds. His tactical display showed 47 human warships against 300 Vorth vessels. The quantum shields were untested and their energy weapons were lighter than Vorth guns. All ships report ready for combat, Communications Officer Park Min announced from her station. The evacuation fleet is requesting permission to join the battle line. The captain considered this request carefully. The evacuation ships carried civilians, but they also mounted defensive weapons and shields. More importantly, they represented something the Vorth had not expected to face. Permission granted. All vessels will coordinate through the quantum communication network. We fight as one fleet regardless of ship type or crew composition. Pilot Lee Jong checked his fighter systems one final time before launching from the Indomitable's flight deck. His squadron of 12 ships would face hundreds of Vorth fighters, but he felt strangely calm. Human pilots had been training for this moment since joining the galactic community. Remember what we learned in the war games, he told his wingmen, over the comm system. Vorth fighters are fast and heavily armed, but they fly in rigid formations. Use our maneuverability to break up their attack patterns. The first contact came when Vorth scout ships entered sensor range of the human defensive line. Captain Park Bo ordered his fleet to hold position while the enemy completed their approach. The quantum communication arrays were working perfectly, allowing instant coordination between all human vessels. High Commander Zalthek appeared on communication screens throughout the new Busan system. His reptilian features showed no emotion as he delivered what he clearly expected to be his final ultimatum. Human defenders, you are outnumbered 10-1 and have no hope of victory. Surrender now, and your civilian population will be relocated safely to your home system. Continue this futile resistance, and we will be forced to eliminate all human presence in this region. General Choi Jun activated the planetary response system, and his weathered face appeared on screens across both fleets. Behind him, the lights of New Seoul glowed against the planet's darkening sky. High Commander Zalthek, we have heard your threats, and we reject them completely. This world belongs to humanity, and we will defend it with everything we have. If you want New Busan, you will have to take it from us. The Vorth response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of energy beams lanced out from their fleet toward the human defensive positions. But instead of finding easy targets, the Vorth weapons encountered something they had never seen before. The quantum shields absorbed and redirected the incoming fire, creating a light show that was visible from the planet's surface. Human ships that should have been destroyed in the first salvo remained intact and began returning fire with their own weapons. Captain Park Bo smiled grimly as his tactical display showed the enemy's confusion. All ships execute pattern Delta 7. Show them what human creativity looks like. The human fleet broke apart into small groups that moved independently while maintaining quantum communication links. Vorth formations that were designed to crush linear battle lines found themselves fighting a dozen separate engagements simultaneously. Pilot Lee Jong led his squadron in a diving attack against a Vorth heavy cruiser. The massive ship's point defense systems tried to track the small human fighters, but their erratic flight patterns made targeting difficult. Fox 3 weapons free, Lee Jong called as he launched his missiles at point-blank range. The warheads struck the cruiser's shield generators and created an opening for the rest of his squadron. To exploit, Major Shin Hai watched the space battle from her position on New Busan's surface, where she commanded the special operations teams. If enemy troops tried to land, her soldiers would be ready with weapons and tactics the Vorth had never encountered, but the space battle was producing unexpected results. The human fleet was not just surviving the initial Vorth assault, but actually inflicting significant damage in return. The quantum communication network allowed Captain Park Bo to coordinate attacks with precision that the enemy could not match. Dr. Kim So broadcast from New Seoul, where she provided real-time analysis of the battle for anyone in the galaxy willing to listen. Her words were being transmitted by secret relay stations to news networks across dozens of star systems. "What we are witnessing here is more than a military engagement," she explained, while explosions lit the sky above her. "This is a test of whether fear or courage will determine the galaxy's future." The Vorth claim to represent order and stability, but look at what their order requires: the destruction of anyone who dares to think differently. 3 hours into the battle, the tide began to turn in ways no one had expected. Ships that were not part of either fleet started appearing at the edge of the system. First came a small Althari task force, followed by Zephyr energy vessels, and then a full squadron of Draknor warships. Communications officer Park Min received a transmission from the Althari commander. "This is Captain Veltar of the Althari Expeditionary Force. We have come to assist in the defense of New Busan, transmitting tactical data now." Similar messages arrived from the other alien fleets. Species that had been too afraid to oppose the Vorth openly were now arriving to fight alongside humanity in direct defiance of the ultimatum. High Commander Zalthek's image appeared again on communication screens, but this time his reptilian features showed obvious anger. "Alien vessels withdraw immediately or be considered hostile targets. This is a Vorth enforcement action against human treaty violations." Captain Veltar's musical voice responded immediately. "High Commander, the only treaty violations we see are your unprovoked attacks against a member species of the Galactic Council. The Althari Expeditionary Force will defend New Busan alongside our human allies." The battle expanded as more species joined the fight against Vorth aggression. Energy weapons designed by different civilizations combined in coordinated attacks that the enemy had never faced before. The rigid Vorth battle formations began to break apart under pressure from multiple directions. General Choi Jun received reports from his observation posts that showed Vorth troop transports pulling back from their planned landing sites. The enemy had expected to face only human resistance and was unprepared for a multi-species coalition. "Sir, we're getting communication requests from across the galaxy," Major Shin Hai reported. "News networks want live feeds from the battle, and government officials are asking for our tactical assessments." The general realized that New Busan had become more than a military target. It was now the symbol of resistance against Vorth domination. Every species that had lived in fear of ultimatums and threats was watching to see if courage could triumph over intimidation. Captain Park Bo coordinated the combined fleet through the quantum communication network as human and alien ships worked together with unprecedented efficiency. The Vorth were still more numerous, but they were no longer fighting just humans. Pilot Li Zhong's squadron had been reinforced by Althari fighters whose advanced shields complemented human maneuverability perfectly. Together, they struck at Vorth command ships, while Draknor heavy cruisers provided covering fire. The space around New Busan blazed with energy as two different philosophies of galactic order met in combat. On one side stood species that believed in cooperation and mutual defense. On the other was an empire built on fear and submission. As the battle reached its climax, Dr. Kim So's broadcasts were being received by billions of beings across the galaxy. Her words would be remembered long after the last shots were fired. "Today, we have seen what happens when free peoples stand together against tyranny." Admiral Han Ri stood in the command center of Luna Station and watched tactical displays that showed Vorth fleets advancing toward Earth itself. The defense of New Busan had lasted 8 hours before the coalition forces finally drove off the enemy fleet, but victory had come at a terrible cost. 17 human ships were destroyed, and 3 alien vessels had been lost defending a world that was not their own. "Status report on all defensive sectors," the Admiral commanded, as his staff coordinated the largest military operation in human history. "Sector 7 reports Vorth scouts probing the outer defense grid," Captain Park Bo announced from his position aboard the rebuilt Indomitable. "Estimated enemy strength is now over 4,000 ships. They've been reinforced since New Busan." The Admiral nodded grimly. He had expected this response from the Vorth leadership. The successful defense of one human colony had embarrassed them in front of the entire galaxy. Now they were committed to crushing human resistance completely to restore their reputation for invincible power. Engineer Yoon Da approached with the latest technical reports from the quantum shield installations. All defensive platforms are operating at maximum efficiency. The new communication arrays are linking not just our ships, but our entire defensive network. Every weapons platform can coordinate with every other system in real time. This was humanity's secret advantage. While the Vorth had been building bigger ships and more powerful weapons, humans had been developing technologies that allowed unprecedented coordination between different military units. The quantum communication network that connected human forces could process and share tactical information faster than any enemy commander could adapt Dr. Kim. So entered the command center carrying reports from the diplomatic front that showed how the galaxy was reacting to recent events. 37 species have now formally condemned the Vorth attacks. 12 have committed military forces to assist in Earth's defense. The Galactic Council is in emergency session trying to figure out how to respond. Ambassador Li Wu was still on Nexus Prime, where he had been working around the clock to build political support for humanity's cause. His latest message showed both hope and concern for the approaching battle. The Vorth have made a critical mistake by attacking New Busan with such overwhelming force. Every species that watched the battle saw what Vorth peace really means. Complete submission, or total destruction. But they're also terrified of what happens if the Vorth win decisively at Earth. Admiral Han Ri understood the political calculations perfectly. If humanity's home system fell despite galactic support, the message would be clear to every species in the galaxy. Opposition to Vorth power was futile, regardless of how many allies you could gather. The first enemy scouts appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system 18 hours after the New Busan battle ended. Long-range sensors showed the main Vorth fleet. Following behind them in a formation that stretched across several light hours of space, confirmed count is 4,200 vessels. Communications officer Park Min reported from her station. Intelligence estimates suggest this is 60% of total Vorth military strength. They're betting everything on destroying human resistance completely. Captain Park Bo had been given command of the integrated defense fleet that now included ships from 15 different species. The quantum communication network allowed him to coordinate vessels with completely different weapon systems and tactical doctrines as if they were all part of a single navy. All fleet commanders report ready for engagement, he announced. Human vessels will focus on mobility and electronic warfare. Althari ships will provide energy weapon support. Draknor heavy units will anchor our defensive line. Zephyr vessels will coordinate point defense systems. This level of real-time coordination between multiple species had never been attempted before in galactic history. Traditional military doctrine called for each species to fight independently, while maintaining minimal communication with allied forces. The quantum networks made true integrated warfare possible for the first time. Pilot Li Zhang prepared his expanded fighter squadron for what everyone knew would be the decisive battle of the war. His original 12 human pilots had been joined by volunteers from 6 different species, creating a mixed unit that shared tactics and technology in ways that military theorists had claimed was impossible. Remember that we're not just fighting for Earth, he told his diverse squadron over the communication network. Every species that has ever faced a Vorth ultimatum is watching this battle. If we win here, the galaxy changes forever, Major Shin. High-coordinated special operations teams that had been placed throughout the solar system on hidden bases and mobile platforms. If the main fleet was overwhelmed, her units would continue the fight using guerrilla tactics that the Vorth had never encountered. The enemy fleet entered the outer solar system in a formation designed to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority. High Commander Zaltek broadcast his final ultimatum on all frequencies while his ships moved toward Earth like an unstoppable force of nature. Humans of the Sol system, you have seen what resistance costs at New Busan. Surrender now, and you will be relocated to a single world under Vorth supervision. Continue this futile defiance, and your species will join the others we have eliminated from galactic history. Admiral Han Ri activated the response system that would carry his words to every human settlement and every allied ship in the system. Behind him, Earth turned slowly in the darkness, showing the blue and green world that had given birth to humanity's dreams of the stars. High Commander Zaltek, we have heard similar threats from tyrants throughout human history. Our response has always been the same. We will not submit to bullies regardless of how many ships they bring. If you want Earth, you will have to take it from us, and we will make you pay for every kilometer. The battle began when Vorth long-range weapons opened fire on the outer defensive platforms. But instead of finding static targets, the enemy discovered that human defensive systems could move and coordinate their responses through the quantum communication network. Captain Park Bo ordered the integrated fleet to execute combat pattern Alpha, which split the Allied forces into dozens of small task groups that attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Vorth formations that were designed to crush traditional battle lines found themselves fighting a three-dimensional chess game where the rules changed every few minutes. Engineer Yunda monitored the quantum shield systems as they absorbed and redirected incoming fire from thousands of enemy weapons. The shields were performing beyond their design specifications, but they were also consuming enormous amounts of power. Shield efficiency is holding at 87%, she reported to Admiral Han Ri. But we're using backup power systems, faster than calculated. Maximum defensive duration is now estimated at 6 hours. The Admiral processed this information while watching the tactical display show the progress of the battle. Human and Allied forces were inflicting damage on the Vorth fleet, but the enemy's numerical advantage was beginning to tell. For every Vorth ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. Dr. Kim so continued her broadcasts from Earth's surface, where billions of humans and their alien friends watched the battle unfold in the space above their world. Her words were being transmitted across the galaxy by communication networks that the Vorth could not jam or destroy. What we see here is the fundamental choice that every civilization must make. Do we build our society on cooperation and mutual respect, or do we rule through fear and intimidation? The Vorth have chosen fear, and for thousands of years it has worked. Today we choose differently. The turning point came when Admiral Han Ri realized that the Vorth were making the same mistake they had made at New Busan. They were so focused on demonstrating their overwhelming power that they were not adapting to the new tactics being used against them. All units execute Plan Omega, he ordered through the quantum communication network. Target enemy command vessels for coordinated strike packages. Make them choose between maintaining formation discipline and protecting their leadership. Plan Omega had been developed specifically for this moment. Instead of trying to match Vorth firepower, the Allied fleet would use superior coordination to isolate and destroy enemy commanders. Without central control, the massive Vorth formations would become individual ships that could be defeated in detail. Captain Park Bo led the integrated fleet in a series of precision strikes against Vorth command vessels, while pilot Li Zhong's mixed fighter squadrons provided close support and electronic warfare capabilities. The quantum communication network allowed split-second timing that the enemy could not counter. Major Xinhai's special operations teams activated hidden weapons platforms throughout the solar system, creating crossfire patterns that caught Vorth ships from unexpected directions. The enemy fleet began to lose cohesion as individual commanders made decisions without central coordination. High Commander Zalthek's flagship found itself isolated from the main Vorth formation when a coordinated attack by human and Althari vessels destroyed the communication relays that linked his command staff to the rest of the fleet. Ambassador Li Wu's final message from Nexus Prime arrived just as the battle reached its climax. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, Ambassador Li Wu stood in the rebuilt council chambers of Nexus Prime and watched delegates from over 100 species work together to address challenges that would have seemed impossible just a year before. The Great Hall had been redesigned with input from dozens of different cultures, creating a space that celebrated diversity rather than enforcing conformity. The Vorth War had ended not with total destruction, but with something far more profound. The massive fleet that had come to crush human resistance had found itself facing not just Earth's defenders, but representatives from half the galaxy. When Admiral Han Ri offered terms for Vorth surrender, High Commander Zalthek had no choice but to accept Dr. Kim. So approached Li Wu with the latest reports from the Reconstruction Committee. New Busan will be fully operational again within 3 months, but it won't be just a human colony anymore. 17 different species have requested permission to establish communities there. This was the pattern emerging across human space. Worlds that had been evacuated during the war were being rebuilt as joint settlements where different species shared technology, culture, and dreams for the future. The quantum communication networks that had coordinated military resistance were now linking diverse communities in ways that created unprecedented cooperation. Captain Park Bo commanded the first integrated fleet from his flagship Indomitable. which now carried crew members from 23 different species. The tactical innovations developed during the war had revolutionized space combat, but their real importance lay in proving that different peoples could work together as equals. Fleet exercises continue to exceed all performance projections, he reported to Admiral Han Ri during their weekly briefing. Mixed crews are developing tactics that no single species could have imagined. The Vorth were right to fear this kind of cooperation. The former Vorth hegemony still existed, but it was a shadow of its former power. 3 of the 4 member species had withdrawn from the alliance after learning the truth about the extinct civilizations. The remaining Vorth found themselves isolated and increasingly irrelevant as the rest of the galaxy moved toward cooperative solutions. Engineer Yun Da had been promoted to head the new Institute for Collaborative Technology, where human innovations were combined with advances from other species to create tools that benefited everyone. The quantum shield systems that had saved Earth were now being shared freely with any species that requested them. The most interesting development is in the Outer Rim territories, she explained to Li Wu during a visit to the Institute. Former Vorth client species are asking for help developing their own defensive capabilities. They don't want to be dependent on anyone's protection anymore. Major Shin Hai led the integrated special forces unit that trained soldiers from dozens of species in techniques for cooperative warfare. The guerrilla tactics she had developed for fighting the Vorth were being adapted for peacekeeping operations in regions where conflict had been frozen by fear for centuries. Pilot Li Zhong commanded the Advanced Tactical Wing, where pilots from different species learned to fly in truly integrated formations. His mixed squadrons had become the model for military cooperation that was being studied throughout the galaxy, but the most important changes were happening in places like the rebuilt New Sol, where children from different species played together, in parks that had once been battlefields. The emotional bonds that the Vorth had feared were spreading as planned families adopted young beings, regardless of their biological origins. Counselor Tak Yu had been elected to head the new archive of Galactic Truth, where the real history of Vorth expansion was being documented and preserved. The extinct species were remembered not as failures, but as martyrs whose sacrifice had finally awakened the galaxy to the cost of submission. We've identified the locations of 17 worlds where entire civilizations were destroyed, she reported to the Council during a memorial session. Archaeological teams are working to preserve what remains and tell their stories to future generations. Ambassador Li Wu found himself serving as Secretary General of the Reformed Galactic Council, where decisions were made through consensus rather than intimidation. The new structure gave every species an equal voice. Regardless of their military strength or economic power, the transformation had not been without challenges. Some species struggled to adapt to cooperative decision-making after centuries of hierarchical rule. Others feared that rapid change would destabilize regions that had been peaceful under Vorth domination, but the benefits were becoming undeniable. Trade between species had increased dramatically as the fear of Vorth retaliation disappeared. Scientific cooperation was producing advances that would have taken centuries to achieve in isolation. Cultural exchange was creating new forms of art and philosophy that enriched every participant. High Commander Zalthek himself had become an unexpected ally in the transformation process. Stripped of his military command and facing war crimes charges, he had chosen to cooperate with investigators, documenting Vorth atrocities. His testimony was helping the galaxy understand how fear had been used as a tool of control for millennia. I believed we were maintaining order, he admitted during one recorded session. But order built on fear is not order at all. It is merely the absence of open resistance. When humans showed that resistance was possible, everything we had built began to collapse. The memorial service for those lost in the Vorth War was held on New Busan, where the first successful defense had taken place. Representatives from every species that had participated in the conflict gathered to honor the dead and commit themselves to preventing future conflicts. General Choi Jun spoke for the military forces that had paid the highest price for freedom. We did not fight to destroy our enemies, but to preserve our right to choose our own destiny. That choice now belongs to every species in the galaxy, Dr. Kim. So addressed the assembled delegates about the lessons learned from humanity's near extinction. The Vorth taught us that diversity can be a source of strength rather than division. Different perspectives allow us to solve problems that would defeat any single viewpoint. As the ceremony concluded, Li Wu walked through the streets of New Seoul, where beings from dozens of species worked together to build something unprecedented in galactic history. A society based on cooperation rather than domination, where strength came from unity rather than fear. The quantum communication networks that had coordinated resistance during the war now carried messages of friendship and collaboration across thousands of light years. Children who had been born during the conflict were growing up in a galaxy where diversity was celebrated and differences were seen as opportunities for learning. Engineer Yunda's latest project involved developing communication technologies that could translate not just words but cultural concepts between species with radically different ways of thinking. The goal was to eliminate the misunderstandings that had led to countless conflicts throughout galactic history. Captain Park Bo's integrated fleets patrolled space lanes that were safer than they had been in centuries. Pirates and raiders found it impossible to operate when their potential victims could call for help from multiple species, willing to respond immediately. The former Vorth territories were being transformed as liberated species developed their own democratic institutions. With help from the Reformed Council, the process was slow and sometimes difficult, but it was producing results that gave hope for the future. Ambassador Li Wu stood at his office window and looked out at the stars that had once seemed hostile and dangerous. Now they represented infinite possibilities for cooperation and growth among peoples who had learned to see their differences as strengths rather than threats. In the end, the galaxy had learned the most important lesson that humanity had to offer. Strength did not come from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the willingness to turn enemies into friends. Fear might control people temporarily, but only hope could inspire them to build something better. The Vorth had been wrong about one thing above all others. Emotional bonds between species were not a weakness to be eliminated, but the foundation upon which a truly advanced civilization could be built. Love was stronger than fear, and cooperation was more powerful than domination. New reports arrived daily of species reaching out to former enemies and ancient grudges being set aside in favor of mutual benefit. Li Wu knew that humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy was not their technology or their courage, but their stubborn belief that different peoples could choose to become family, the stars that had witnessed the near extinction of the human race now looked down on a galaxy where that same species was helping others discover the strength that came from standing together against the darkness.